Well, good morning. God bless you. Good to see you. If I'm look a little slow today, it's because I feel that way after working in our fireworks stand the last 2 weeks, sometimes for 13 or 14 hours a day. I'm exhausted, I tell you. But we had a great time out there just blessing people, making good relationships, and the Lord has blessed us. I don't know the numbers yet, but He's taking care of us on that, and we'll have enough money to, I think, send a lot of our kids to camp. So we're excited about that. We're just excited. What a great weekend, actually, for the nation. I mean, I don't think many of them realize how momentous this is. Somebody asked me this week, a younger person asked me, do you remember the 200th celebration of America? And I'm like, actually, I do. I think I was 6th grade. Sue, you had been a little older than that, but 6th grade. And I that was a pretty big deal, but still, I mean, this is just huge, that we're 250 years in this great experiment of freedom and democracy. And I don't say in any way that that's a comparison at all for the relationship we have with our Lord and the citizenship we have in heaven. But, I believe this is what God wants. He wants us to have a freedom, and He wants us to use it well and make good decisions. And in fact, Paul said it's for freedom that Christ has set you free. And so sometimes as followers of Christ, we take the freedom that we've been given, and then we impose our version of that freedom on ourselves and on others, don't we? When you got to be in church and what you got to be doing and how much you have to give and, the way you dress and the way you act, and not just here but in your life. And we've imposed that. And I think, when Paul wrote those words, he's writing them to the Galatian church, which is a church that struggled with the idea of freedom because they were being imposed upon by the Jews around them who said, you have to be circumcised just like us. You have to live according to the law just like we did. And that was something that was determined long ago, that that's not at all what God had in mind. And so I think as Christians, sometimes we take the freedom we have for granted. We take it for granted. And so I want to show you a face here, and I want to see if you, some of you older ones might know this. Some of you, I don't know, maybe you all know it. This face. Who is that? Anybody? Give you a hint. It's not John F. Kennedy. Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Now, how many of you know the name Nelson Mandela? So Nelson Mandela is a man who made a huge difference on the lives and on the freedom of those in the South African country. In August of 1964, now to kind of place you there, August of 1964, I was a year and a half old, right? We had just moved down from Spokane, where I was born. We were living in Portland. So that's how old I was, 1964. In August of 1964, Nelson Mandela was arrested, he was tried, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to life in prison as a political prisoner. And as a political prisoner, they sent him out to Robben Island. Now, Robben Island is about 1 mile wide and 2 miles long. I think I have some pictures of some of these here. It is about 4 miles off the coast of South Africa. So, you could think of like John being on the island of Patmos out there, kind of sent away. Except that in this case, he wasn't just placed on the island. He was placed in a prison, a one-story prison, about 100 cells, something like that. His particular cell was 8 by 7. Think about that for a minute. 8 by 7. It's not even the length and width of 2 full sheets of plywood. And in that cell was one window. That was his only source of light. And while he was in that prison, he got to send, for at least the earlier part of his years, got to send one letter and make one phone call a month. That's it. One letter. And all those, of course, watched over and stuff. For about 13 years of that time, he worked in a lime quarry just outside, just on the edge of the island. Worked in this lime quarry, hammering, chiseling, carrying lime. And his prison number 4664, he was in prison for 27 years. That's what the life sentence carried for him. 27 years in this prison. All for the sake of a dream. The dream of freedom for black Africans. All for the sake of an ideal. The ideal that the white and black could be equal in that country. 27 years of waiting, of not knowing, whatever's going to happen day after day after day, year after year after year, questioning, is it worth it? Is it ever going to change? Until 1990, when he was released. And when he was released, it galvanized the country behind him. And today, South Africa lives in an entirely different world where black and white work alongside each other. They both rule together. They're elected. In fact, so great was this man to his country that the name for him, up until the time he died there, was Tata, which means father. Now, when you think about this, 27 years. In 1990, remember I said when he was arrested and put in prison, I was a year and a half old. In 1990, I'd already gone through all of my years of grade school, middle school, high school. I'd already gone to college. I'd graduated with college. I was already teaching. I already had been married, and we had 3 kids. And Jake, our youngest, was in the oven, so to speak. Jake was on his way. That's how my life had changed in that 27 years. But in those 27 years, Nelson Mandela was still in prison. And though the story is different, this man known as Tata, as father, there's a lot of similarities between his story and this other man that we've been studying named Abraham, who is also called father, the father of many faiths, father of Christianity, father of Islam, father of Judaism. I mean, that's over half of the world's population call him or refer to him as father, either genetically or spiritually or both. And so we've been talking about Abraham, this 75-year-old Babylonian nomad who gets this call from God to do something different, to change things. And with this call comes a set of promises. And part of the promises are, you're going to be a great nation, and your descendants are going to outnumber the stars, outnumber the sands of the earth. And you're going to have a great name. I'm going to make your name great. And I'm going to bless you. And when you bless others, I'm going to bless them. And I'm going to bless others through you. In fact, all the world is going to be blessed through you. And he hears this call from God, and with these promises from God, and he leaves everything he knew, everything he had, at age 75 years old. And for a day, for a month, for a year, for decades, he waits, and he waits, and he waits. And along the way, he has times of doubt. Along the way, he's confused. Along the way, he thinks things are impossible, and he asks himself, how? But here's what we read in Scripture about Abraham, and we read this a number of times in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Here's how James says it. We read it a couple weeks ago. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. Abraham believed God, even through the years of silence, even through the years of doubt, even though nobody else believed him, even though everything he said was impossible, he believed God. And don't take this too lightly, he believed in God, right? Now, that doesn't seem like such a big deal in our culture, in our world, that someone could believe in God. But in his culture, nobody believed in God. So this is amazing that he believed in God. He came from the great city of Ur in Mesopotamia. No one in that city believed in God. Nobody called on God. Nobody listened to God. They were very polytheistic. They had a number of gods that they served and they worshipped and built idols to. They were superstitious, and they did not believe in the one true God. Nobody believed him. Not even his family. Not even his father, who served the moon god, Nana. Not even his brother, Haran. In fact, you'll see that his family didn't believe. He's going to go to a land of Canaan. Nobody believed there. There's no evidence at that time that anybody on this globe believed and called on the one true God. But Abraham did. He heard him, he believed, and he followed. Now, if that's all we get out of that series, if that's all we get out of this, that's a great thing, and that can be life-changing. That can impact us in great ways. That we could just believe, even though our culture doesn't believe, even though sometimes our family might not believe, even though our friends don't believe, even though we're surrounded by people who might not believe, and that if we could just be a friend of God, and trust him, that he's not just an entity, but he's somebody that we can have an actual relationship with, that we can interact with, that we can allow our lives to be shaped around. And then if we could truly believe and trust in him and be his friend, that he would call us friend because we believe. How much better would we be? How much different would our lives be? How much more positive, how much more impacting could that be? Now, that's a whole sermon. I'm not going to preach that sermon. You can see there's a good sermon we could preach just on that aspect, to believe, not just believe God, but to believe in him in such a way that it impacts our culture. And Abraham, as we saw last week, he doesn't always make the right decisions. Sometimes he goes a wrong direction. Last week he failed on his trip down to Egypt, right? And not only did he fail in that, and he made his own plans instead of following the Lord, but he really let his wife down. He put her in a precarious situation, potentially dangerous situation, and that was all because he didn't trust God in that moment. But what's interesting in the story, we haven't talked about him a lot here, but Abraham and Sarah are going, Abraham and his wife Sarah, but there's a third person who's with them from the beginning in all this. That's this nephew, Lot. Now, I want to get your picture on Lot because we think of nephew, but keep in mind that Abraham was 75 when this starts. And his older brother Haran, who has already died, has left his son Lot to his father Terah. Okay, so Lot is probably 60 or 65 years old. He is no spring chicken. He is no kid that you got to watch over and babysit. He's not even a young man that you got to kind of teach the ways of the world. He is an older guy, but Lot still is under the care of his grandfather Terah until Terah dies. And then Abraham takes him on, and he follows Abraham. And everywhere you see Abraham go, Lot goes in the initial stages of this. And so they go down to Egypt, and you see that they both go down together, and they both experience what Egypt has to offer, and they come back changed, both of them, but one of them changes for the better, and one of them changes for the worse. One of them grows closer to God, and one of them grows farther from God. One of them develops more humility, and one of them develops more pride. And I want to look at the contrast today between these two men who went through this same experience but came out in different directions, and those directions are going to change the course of their lives. So when Abraham and Lot went down to Egypt, it was a test of their faith in adversity. Remember, there was a famine in the land, and Abraham said, oh, no, God promised me all this stuff, but now there's this famine, so I better go down to Egypt. And he went down south, but he also went down morally. You see some things there. So he didn't trust God when the times got tough. Usually for us, it's a little easier to trust God when things are tough because sometimes there's just no other option, right? When you're dealing with cancer, you're dealing with, crisis in your finances or a relationship, you call out to God because there's nobody else to call out to. But this time, we're not talking about a test of faith in crisis. We're talking about this test of faith in success. And sometimes the test of faith in success is harder for us because things are going well. And let's just be honest, we don't need God as much. We can do things on our own. And I know lots of people who've done, really call on the Lord in their times of crisis, but in the times of success, they are okay without him. I got this, God. I'll call you when I need you. I got it taken care of. Don't worry about me. I got things under control. See, it's one thing to trust God during the times of trial and hardship and difficulty. It's another when things are going well. Because when we experience success, sometimes we get arrogant. Sometimes we get prideful. Sometimes we get self-sufficient. Sometimes we just get selfish, right? Abraham failed the test of adversity last week, but we're going to see here how he handles the test of success. So let me pick it up where we left off last week. We're going to be right at the beginning of chapter 13, verse 13, verse 1. So it says, Abraham went up from Egypt. Remember last week he went down to Egypt, and then he had some problems there because he lied to the Pharaoh and all, and they literally kicked him out of Egypt, right? Kicked him out, sent him on his way. He went up from Egypt to the Negev, which is a desert in South Israel. It's literally about 3 times the size of Coos County, so it's not a huge desert. So he goes down there, and it's interesting that he does this. It says, and with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. So he's got him, his wife, who's probably not happy with him for the problems down in Egypt, and Lot, who's been experiencing the good life in Egypt, just as Abraham was. It's interesting, though, that throughout these next three chapters, 11, 12, and 13 here, there's this idea that everywhere that Abraham went, Lot went with him. Now that's going to change here in this chapter, but everywhere he went, Lot went with him. This Lot, this nephew Lot, who is, like I said, probably 60 or 65. And as I said before, as I've said a lot of times, he is a lot of trouble. He is a lot of headache. He is a lot of stress. He is a lot of pain and a lot of problems. This is what he is. There's no redeeming quality that we can see in Lot's life in Scripture. So verse 2 goes on. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. And he's also got a lot of manservants and maidservants. We talked about the one, Hagar, we're going to talk about in a few weeks. She's going to be instrumental, and she's a huge part of the shaping of Abram's life. But he's like this rich uncle. So he comes back, he's a rich uncle. Everybody, we all wish we had a rich uncle, right? Who, would help us out, give us money, whatever. It says Abraham was very wealthy, he's very successful, and some of this, a big chunk of this, happens because of the trip to Egypt. Pharaoh and the leaders there, they gave him a lot of stuff because of his sister, Sarah, who was really his wife, right? They were honoring him. But when they found out she was his wife, they sent him away, but they didn't take back his stuff. They let him go with all that stuff. And he could have become arrogant with all that stuff. But remember last week at the very end of our message, we saw that Abraham, what he does, he builds this altar. He comes back to this altar he's built, and he repents. And he worships the Lord. He repents from the decision that he made without the Lord's instruction, without the Lord's leading, and he repents on that. Now, that's verse 2. Verse 5. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. So somehow Lot, who had nothing, has become very wealthy. Let me ask you a question. Where do you think Lot got his stuff from? Maybe some of it he got from Egypt, but there's no reason for anybody to reward him in Egypt. How did Lot, who's this orphan child, get his wealth? And I'm going to tell you what I think. I think he got it all through Abraham. I think Abraham, who wanted to do the best for his nephew, his brother's son, who again wasn't a child. He's like 60. It's not like, we got our grandkids with us. We take him out to ice cream because we want to treat him. This is a 60-year-old man. For me, it's like taking out, I guess it's like taking out my brother because I'm 63. So it's about that age. He's not young, right? He hurts when he gets up in the morning. And it says he's got all this. And I think the only reason that Lot has anything is because of Abraham's generosity. It's because God said, others will be blessed through you. You will be a blessing to everyone around you. I think that's what we're supposed to be. It's another sermon I'm not going to preach. But I think we are called to be a blessing to everyone. Everyone. People who like us, people who don't like us, people who agree with us, people who don't agree with us, people with lifestyles like us, people who have lifestyles different than us. I think we're called to be a blessing. I think sometimes we get this idea that we're called to be the judge. That we're supposed to judge people who aren't living like us, who aren't following the sins. I don't think we are called to be the judge of this world. In fact, I'm crystal clear. Scripture does not give us that authority to be the judge of the unsaved and the wicked and all that. That's God's. He'll judge them as appropriate. We judge each other in a sense that we help each other. See, we don't even get to judge each other and condemn each other. We get to judge in the sense of discernment. So if I see Sue struggling with something, it is my responsibility to come along beside Sue, lift her up, help her carry part of her burden. Sorry, Sue, to pick on you. I only pick on you because you're so close to perfect. But that is what we do. We're called to be a blessing. Do you understand me, folks? We are called to be a blessing. When you look at somebody and you go, oh, man, I can't believe that he's a parent. I can't believe that person spends their money that way. I can't believe they drive like that. You understand? That's not what God called us to do. Amen. We are called to bless. And I'm not saying we're supposed to overlook flaws and faults. I'm not saying that at all. I'm also not saying we're supposed to put ourselves in the company of all kinds of sinners and all kinds of problems with other people in their lives. Some of us are not equipped for that, or we're not equipped for parts of that. But we are called to bless in whatever way God gives us. Okay, again, another sermon. I'm not going to preach that sermon. I'm really struggling here, folks, trying to keep away from the sermons I'm not supposed to preach. All right, so you would think, though, with this, all this generosity that Abraham gives to Lot, that Lot would have been filled with gratitude. Tasha told me this morning, she said, today's service is sponsored by the letter G. I don't know if you noticed it. All of our songs started with G. I don't think she set out to do that, but that's what ended up. Well, let me tell you what. The sermon is sponsored by the letter G because it comes down to these two things, generosity and gratitude and also greed. Because what you're going to see here in Lot's life is you see a lot of greed and not a lot of gratitude. I know, a little play on words there. Now, this could refer to the quantity, right? There's a lot of greed, you see that, and there's not a lot of gratitude. But I want you to think about the character involved here. He is a lot of greed. That's the tenor of his life. He is certainly not a lot of generosity. In fact, he was a lot of trouble, and even his herdsmen, it seems, it turns out, were a lot of trouble because they're quarreling with Abraham. I mean, it's Abraham's land. He's the one who owns everything at this point, but the herdsmen are quarreling with him. So both these guys are wealthy. Both of them have livestock. Both of them have people. And that, by the way, is part of the problem. Because if you and I have lots of money, that's no big deal. Because we keep our money in the bank. My money doesn't affect your money doesn't affect my money. No big deal. But if I'm a farmer, if I'm a landsman, if I'm a rancher, I've got lots of land that requires for all my people, all my workers, all my animals, all the crops that I try to raise. It takes a lot of land. And both these guys, that's how they have their wealth. It's not in, I mean, they may have some, jewels or stones or some amount of something, but it's mostly in the number of people and animals that they have serving them. And so there's this tension between them because the land that they're on is limited in space. It's limited. And there's some that's good and there's some that's bad, and then there's the watering holes and whether there's enough or not, and who gets there first, because the ones that get there first get the best water, and the ones that get there last, and who gets to make those decisions. And here's the thing, it's not even just about Abraham and Lot, because there are other people around. They're not the only ones in the world in this area. There are other people around who have properties and stuff. And you'd think that Lot, out of a sense of gratitude, would say to his uncle Abraham, hey, listen, I appreciate everything you've done for me. You just tell me where I can be. You go where you want, and you just tell me where I can be. You would think that's the way it would be, but that's not Lot's character. Watch this, verse 8. So Abraham said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. You see, this? It's like I'm your uncle, and listen to me, I'm the grown-up here. No, you're still 60, dude. We're brothers. We're on the same wavelength, same channel. Now, Lot, I think, because he's the one receiving so much, and he's certainly supposed to be responsible, he's the one that should be taking the initiative out of respect, out of gratitude, out of humility, but it's not. It's Abraham that does this, and he says, all this stuff here is just stuff. We're family, and that's more important. I don't know if any of you have ever been involved, maybe, or seen a family where somebody who has a lot of accumulation of wealth dies. And the brothers and the sisters, they're all squabbling. And literally, relationships end over this. Families divide over this, over who gets what and who gets the most. And Abraham's saying, hey, listen, it doesn't matter. It's just stuff. Let's keep that all in mind. Because that's Abraham's character. His character here is off the charts. It is so awesome in this, and he goes way beyond what's expected. Look at this, verse 9. Is not the whole land before you? He says this to Abraham, or to Lot. Abraham says, hey, listen, look around. Is not the whole land before you here? Let's part company, because we got to separate it. We got too much stuff here. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot, you choose. I don't care which way you choose. Whatever you want, you take it. I'll go the other direction. It's interesting that he defers to his young nephew, even though the model of that day would be to always respect your elders, even if there's only 15 years and you're both old guys. You always respect your elders. And let's keep in mind this. Lot deserves nothing. He didn't bring anything into this. He didn't earn anything. He hasn't done anything to accumulate this kind of wealth. It's all from Abraham. But Abraham goes even further than just sharing the wealth. He gives Lot the choice in how he wants to receive the wealth. Remember, the land was promised to who? Who did God promise the land to? Abraham. He never said, listen, Lot, come on, this is about you too. No, I mean, you guys together figure it out, but you're going to divide this up. No, Lot, Abraham, this is your land. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Is Lot Abraham's descendant? No, he says nephew. He's in a totally different branch. Not that God is trying to dishonor him, but the promises for Abraham and his descendants, his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and all the way down to the Jews that we have today. It's for Abraham. It's his land that God has given him that. And yet he's been incredibly generous and trusting in this. Verse 10 goes on. Lot looked around. Now, let me just pause there. It says Lot looked around, but I don't want you to think for a second Lot just kind of looked like this, because the scope of where they were and the land that they're talking about is much farther. So this looking around would have taken him days, if not weeks, to do. He would have had to travel a lot because he's going to see a lot of things. He's going to discover a lot of different parts of this land, and he's going to discover some cities that are similar to what he experienced in Egypt. And let's just be honest, he liked Egypt, and he liked it a lot, right? So it says he looked around, and he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward the Zoar, which is down by the Dead Sea, was well watered. Now, it's a different period now. It's not well watered like it was back then, but it was at that time well watered. And it says this, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. And it's a little parenthetical note here that says this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to get to that in about 7 weeks, okay? We're going to get to that section there. So just hold on to that. But so Lot sees this whole plain, and he explores and he discovers. He's got to figure out, it's a wise thing to do, right? Abraham said, you pick. So he's going to investigate and find out what's best. And what he finds is this plain here of the Jordan, which they call it, is lush, and it's green, and it's fertile, and it's beautiful. It says, like the garden of the Lord. Now, there's no other definition there, but it seems to me that what they're referring to is the Garden of Eden. And many scholars think that the Garden of Eden was in Mesopotamia. That's where he had come from Ur in Mesopotamia. So maybe he'd seen parts of the area there that was very lush. But in any case, it was at least legendary. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't have to believe in God to think something can be really cool that you've heard or read about. It was legendary, this Garden of Eden, lush, and the vines and the fruit, and hardly any work to do anything. I mean, this is exactly what he was. And so he says it was lush like the Garden of Eden. Or it says like the land of Egypt. Now, we don't know much about what it looked like in Egypt for them, but it was a city life. So there's these cities that are down there. There's 3 or 4 cities that at that time were along the coast of the garden, or of the sea of the Dead Sea. Thank you, down there. And so he's gone down there, and these cities are some happening place, right? Sodom is down there, Gomorrah is down there, and there's a few other cities. And these are, I mean, busy places. A lot of things happening. It's kind of reminds him of all the fun. You can see for Lot, it's like he's gone back to Vegas, or he's gone back to New Orleans, where the cities are happening and the road names are, they tell you, Whiskey Road and that kind of stuff. You can go out at night, all night, and have fun. And Lot is used to that, and he loves that. So here he's just found this good stuff. He says it's like the land of Egypt. And so it says here in verse 11, so Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan. The whole plain of the Jordan. Not, hey, listen, I'll take this half and you take this half. The whole plain of the Jordan. And he set out toward the east. The 2 men parted company. Lot chose for himself. He didn't go to the Lord and say, Lord, what do you want? What do you think's the best? In fact, there's no evidence of Lot ever building an altar, calling on the Lord, worshiping the Lord, repenting of anything. It's almost as if he doesn't even know who God is. He hasn't had any interaction with this God of Abraham. There's never a conversation between them, never any idea that Lot knows anything about him. It's all about him. And by the way, it's not just all about him. It's not about his uncle. That's the other thing. You would think that there'd be maybe a little bit of appreciation there, but no, nothing like that. He takes the whole plain of the Jordan. He's not going to share any of it. He's going to take it all for himself. And then notice this. It says he set out for the east. Now, I don't want to make too much about this, but in Scripture, sometimes east is sort of a picture of sin or the result of sin. For example, Garden of Eden. They sin. God finds out. He gives them their judgment. And then what's he do? He kicks them out of the garden to the east, right? Later on, they have a couple kids, Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills Abel. Cain gets judged. God puts a mark on him, but he protects him. But notice he sends him out to live in the east. So I don't know if that's what this is about, but Lot is heading out to the east, and it's sort of a metaphorical way of saying maybe he's moving away from God further. But also notice it says he chooses the whole plain of the Jordan. Now, that Jordan, we hear that all the time. We know, not Michael Jordan, but the Jordan River Jordan. And Jordan comes from the word, it's literally the word Yarden, which means to descend. So this is metaphorical, spiritual picture of Lot choosing this path of descent, right? What we see here is that Lot is heading for the lowest point. He's heading, you'll see that later. He hits some real lows in this, doesn't he? And this is certainly true geographically. We can see if we look at a map here that I put up for you. There's a map here. You see up in the very north, that's where Abraham is. And in the south, that's where Lot chooses. But in a geographic sense, as far as the distance north and south, up in the north, you've got Mount Hermon. Okay, that Mount Hermon up there, and it's going to have the Jordan River flow all the way down, and it's going to hit down at the bottom. It's going to hit the Dead Sea. But it takes this path, and it's very interesting. And it's an altitudinal path. So Mount Hermon in the north, in the wintertime, is snow-covered. And that's where the water comes from for the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, all of this. It's snow-covered. It's literally about 2,800 feet high. That's not super high if you live in Oregon, but in that area, that's a pretty high mountain. And it flows down, and there's several rivulets and streams and creeks that flow out of this, and they all converge together, and they become the northern side of the Jordan River. And that Jordan River flows down, and it enters on the north side, it enters the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is about 64 square miles. If you want to kind of picture it, it's about 4 times the size of our own Crater Lake. So that's how big the Sea of Galilee is. It's not like an ocean big, but it's bigger than just a lake big. So it's there, and that Sea of Galilee is already descended now from what I say was 2,800 feet high down to 700 feet below sea level. Okay, so we're now at 3,500. It's dropped just in that little distance there. But the Sea of Galilee, water comes into it, and it's teeming with life. Fish and all kinds of other kinds of life there. There are active businesses that make their living on the Sea of Galilee, because at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River exits again, and it travels down again. Now, it travels a linear distance of 65 miles, not so far, but the distance of the river, because it winds a lot, is 135 miles. And it travels down again. There's life along the way. Jesus was baptized. Jesus' disciples baptized others. John the Baptist was known for that. A lot of people still today get baptized on the banks of the Jordan. But it enters down at the bottom another body of water, which we know as the Dead Sea. And there's a reason it's called the Dead Sea, because at the Dead Sea, there's no exit. At the Dead Sea, the water comes in, but it never goes out. It goes down there, and it evaporates. And because the water evaporates, all the salt and minerals in the water stay there, so it becomes very, very salty. In fact, it's so salty, you literally cannot sink yourself in that. It would be very difficult to swim to the bottom unless you had weights, because you're going to float. You just jump in and you just float as the water holds you up. But as well, there's no life there at all. There's a sign down there at the bottom. It says, lowest point on earth. And that is a true statement. And now there are maybe things that are below in tunnels and caves and stuff. You can get way down further. But this is the lowest point on just a basic earth in the entire planet. That's how low. That's this distance, this drop that you're seeing even, and you kind of see this philosophically and morally in Lot's life here. But it's also a picture of life. It's a picture of life for us. And it's that you can't get lower in his relationship than he is with his uncle. He can't get lower than he is with God than the distance he's going and walking away from God. And you're going to see later, too, he gets involved in some immorality that also takes him way down. And one more thing. The Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee become great metaphors for Abraham and Lot as you look at their lives and how they are. As I said earlier, the Sea of Galilee, it comes in from the Jordan and has lots of life and fish and other things around it, and then it flows out. And you see that in Abraham's life. Blessings flow in, blessings flow out. That's what I said. We're supposed to be people who bless others, not because we're just told to, but because God blesses us. And we're supposed to share those blessings. We're supposed to transmit those blessings, let them flow through us. But the Dead Sea has blessings flow in, life flows into the Dead Sea, but it never flows out. It just dies right there. And that's how Lot is. He sucks in, he takes in, he gathers in. It's all for himself, but you don't ever see Lot giving out. All right, we beat that one up enough. All right, let me move on. Verse 12. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, and that's where he stays most of his life. That's going to be, this is the promised land, but it's going to become the land of Israel. He lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived, look here, among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. So he has all this land he's farming and ranching on, but he lives in the cities. He's a city boy. He remembers Ur. He loved that. He remembers Egypt. He loved that. And now he's back in these cities along the Dead Sea. Abraham gives Lot the first choice, and Lot chose the biggest and the best that he could possibly get, and Abraham took what was left. And you think, oh, that's kind of sad for Abraham, but God's got another plan. And here's what I want you to notice about Abraham. He had this selfless humility. He just gives. And this is where you see the gospel. This is where you see our story. See, Abraham willingly humbles himself. He gives himself to others. He selflessly gives up what is rightfully his. God gave him that whole land, but he gives up a portion of that land to an undeserving man. That's because he values the relationship. It's more important to him than what he gave up. Now, does that sound familiar about somebody who had everything but gave it all up? Maybe for us? See, that's what Jesus did. He would give up what was rightfully his for an undeserving nephew like me or like you. We are a lot like Lot. We take in, we don't always give out. What happens here in Abraham and Lot is exactly what Jesus is going to do for all of us. In fact, Paul writes that to the Corinthian church. He says this, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty, you and me, we might become rich." That's our story. I'm Lot. You're Lot. We're all Lot. And Jesus valued his relationship with us so much that he gave up everything that was his for us, to give us life. So Lot is off to get rich, and Abraham is just watching him go. Now, this is interesting here. He's just wandering away. Abraham's like, goodbye. And he's wandering. And then it says, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him. So while him and Lot are talking, God doesn't get involved. There's no conversation that it's not, God says, okay, listen, I'm going to talk to you guys. I got to sort this out. Now, when Abraham had left, or when Lot had left, it says, God said to Abraham, look around you from where you are, to the north and the south, to the east and the west. Look, right? Look to the north. Look to the south. Take a long look. Maybe scout around. Look to the east. Look to the west. Look at all these areas. And then he says this. Here's this blessing. God reaffirms and he reveals more of his promise now. It's the same promise. He's just kind of giving a little bit more detail, right? And he says here, everything that you see around you, pay attention to it, because I've got some really good news. Now remember, he said first, go to the land that I will show you, right? He says, I'm going to make you a great nation. And then he says, I'm going to give you this land. And then he comes back in verse 15. Here's what he says. All the land that you see, to the north, the south, the east, and the west, all the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I'm going to give you all the land in the north that you can see, everything up there, way beyond that, all the land to the south that you can see, and way beyond that, all the land to the east, and way beyond that, all the land to the west, and way beyond that, I'm going to give it to you and to your descendants, to your offspring. I'm going to give it all to you because you trusted me. And this is what's interesting. Abraham has just given Lot all this land to the south and east. But God says, don't worry about it because I'm going to give it back to you. It's all going to be yours again. Even though you just gave it away, I'm still, because you trusted me, because you believed in me, because you're my friend, I'm going to give it back to you. And this is a lesson, I think, that you see from the Abraham has to learn over and over and over, to trust in the Lord. It's really the theme even of our message this morning, to trust in the Lord. It's a message he has to learn because one day, God is going to ask Abraham to give up something that he never thought he'd have to give up. And in order to make this work right, he has to trust in God. And we'll get to that. That'll come up in several weeks down the road. So it says here, I want you to imagine, he's watching Lot. He's seeing him, all of his manservants, his maidservants, all of his animals, they're all leaving. And they're all walking across this dusty plain. And as they're going, you can just see the dust coming up. And he's just watching them go. God says, don't worry, I'm going to give it all back to you. And then he says, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. All this dust you see, every dust ever, that's your offspring. It's all going to be like that. So that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. What I'm going to do for you, Abraham, you can't even imagine. You can't possibly understand. Your offspring are going to be uncountable. Now, I can count most of mine. I got 16 grandkids. I got 5 kids. You know, when we get together for Christmas, it's about 30 people, depending who shows up. It's very countable. If I looked out for all my cousins and their kids, my brothers and sisters and their kids and grandkids, I could count all of them. We can even count beyond that number. But Abraham, your family is going to be so great, it's not going to be countable. Keep in mind, he doesn't even have one son yet. Not even one child yet. At age 75. How many of you at age 75 thought, hey, honey, maybe it's a good time to start a family? What do you think? Have a couple kids, grandkids? None of you thought like that. And heaven forbid, if one of you found yourself in that situation, it would change your life drastically, right? But God says, you're going to have these kids. Will you trust me? Will you follow me? Will you walk in obedience? Yes, Lord, I will. Then go. It's all going to be yours. Verse 18. Abraham went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron. Remember earlier? He went to another great tree, and he built an altar there and trusted in the Lord. And he lived there for a little bit, but he moved on, but the altar still stayed. He went to the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, that's way in the south now, where he pitched his tents, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Once again, he builds a temporary dwelling for himself and a permanent dwelling for God. He worships the Lord. He believes. He trusts him. And then do you know what he does? He waits. And he waits. And he waits. Days. Months. Years. He waits. No child. Lord, what happened? Where's the promise? This doesn't make sense. Just caring for the herds, taking care of the flock, living in a tent. Ladies, how many of you would move into a tent with your husband at age 75, age 80? Honey, I think I'm going to build us a new tent. Age 90. This is Abraham's life. Hebrews 10 says this. I'm sorry, Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, faith chapter. It gives the most amount of space to Abraham, and it says this. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. See, that's the home he was looking for. In Abraham's lifetime, he never had generations that could be uncounted. He could have, on his day of his death, he could have counted everyone in his lineage, everyone. He never in his lifetime had possession of that land, just a little bit of land that he was taking care of, but that's it. And any one of it could have been taken. He didn't have a great army. He didn't have a nation. He wasn't a great blessing to the world. In his lifetime, this never happened. But he continued to wait, continued to trust. And it says here that he had waiting, looking forward to the city with foundations, real foundations, whose architect and builder, not of this world, not of the great cities of Egypt or Ur or Mesopotamia or any of that, but of the Lord. He trusts in all of that. He'd been in some of the great cities. He'd been in Ur, right? He'd been in some of the great cities of Egypt. He'd been around. But those aren't the cities he's looking forward to. God had called him from those cities to trust him for an even greater city, whose foundation could not be moved, whose foundation was secure. And Lot, he's off on his own, right? He's trying to establish his own identity, his own wealth, his own success, his own hope, his own joy. And it's all according to his plans. But Abraham is trusting God, not for his own plans, but for the plans of the Lord. Lot is building his life on the sand, literally and figuratively and spiritually, but Abraham is building his life on the rock of the solid God, the solid rock of the Lord. See, the bottom line here is, when we say that Abraham believed God, it wasn't just something that he had up here. He didn't just believe him like, oh, I believe God. No, he acted this out in his life. And it was an important part of who he was. And he knew what would later be written, that unless the Lord builds a house, The builders what? Labor in vain. It doesn't matter. And so for Abraham, it was beyond belief to total trust. It was beyond belief to total trust. He trusted in his future. He trusted his future to the Lord. He trusted his family to the Lord. He trusted his wealth to the Lord. He trusted his promises to the Lord. Everything he had, he trusted to God, and he believed God when no one else did. When no one else followed God, he followed God. When no one else was obedient to the Lord, he was obedient. When nobody else called on the name of the Lord or worshiped him, he called on the name of the Lord and he worshiped him. He trusted God when everything else in culture said, don't trust him. And 1,000 years later, a wise king would write words in the book of Proverbs that would say this: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And we're going to say, in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. That's Abraham's life. That's how he trusted God, who is the same yesterday and today and forever. Right? He trusted in that God. And he's still looking for people like us to trust him in the same exact way. The lots of the world who have been blessed by selfless giving, they don't understand that. They don't value that. And there's a price that they pay for that. But the Abrahams of the world who believe him, who trust in him, they're rewarded in a much greater way, in a much more lasting way. And even when our culture doesn't understand that, even when our families don't understand that, even when all those around us don't understand that, God says, just trust me. Just believe me. Just follow me. I don't know if we live in an age of debit cards. I'll tell you with our fireworks stand, in the early days, we had about 50% cash, 50% debit. This year, we had about 90% debit and credit and 10% cash. But some of us still carry a little bit of cash around. I don't know if you got some cash sometime, you could look at it. If you got it right now, you can look at it. I brought this. This is the extent of my wealth. It's a $1. Hey, I don't mock it. It's a crisp $1 bill. It's not too wrinkly. But I want you to know something about this $1 bill. On the back of this $1 bill, it says, "In God we trust." I don't know if you know this about American money. Every piece of American money that's current, every piece says on the back of it, "In God we trust." It's law, in fact, that we have to say that. It may not always be law, and it certainly is not exemplified by the lives of those who spend these dollars and coins. But as a nation, we have declared that we trust in God, that in God we trust. And here's what I want to say to you. This week, as you spend money, now, maybe it's some cash or something, or maybe you see it. Maybe it's a debit card or credit card. You don't get to see the money. It's still being spent. But I want you to remember those words. In God we trust. How about we personalize it? In God I trust. In God I trust. Lord, I'm going to trust you how to spend this dollar. I'm going to trust you to spend all of my dollars. I'm going to trust you how to spend my time. I'm going to trust you how to spend my energy. I'm going to trust you how I spend my relationship wealth, who I interact with and how I interact with them. Am I a blessing to them? Can I be a greater blessing to them? That's what I want you to ask. Lord, can you help me to trust you? I want to make a fresh decision for each of us to believe God in such a way that we live differently, that we live it out, that others can see our faith. Abraham trusted God, right? And I want us to be able to say, Lord, I trust you too. He wasn't perfect. He made some big mistakes. He made one we saw last week. It's not the last mistake. It's not even the biggest mistake. He's got some big ones ahead of him, all right? But Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. That's what God said. He didn't, Lord, Abraham, I see you're not living a perfectly righteous life by your lifestyle, but you believe me. I'm going to count that as righteousness. That's going to go in your spiritual bank account. And he was called a what? Friend of God. So our ushers are going to come. We're going to take communion now. And we always give you something to think about when you're doing the communion. You know, it could be about gratitude and thankfulness. That's certainly part of the story today. You know, it could be about being, putting Christ inside of you and this oneness that we have with God. But today, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about the trust aspect of this. See, Jesus, when he sat at the table with his disciples, 12 of them at that time, one of them already kind of lost, he said to them, when you take this, I want you to do this in remembrance of me. Think about what Jesus did, how he gave himself for us, how everywhere he went, he blessed people, people that trusted him, people that didn't always trust him. Some of them had immense trust for him, and some of them, they weren't sure. I mean, someone's dead. How do you trust in that? But he still blessed them. He still honored them. He fed people regardless of what their theological and their philosophical and their political beliefs were. Lord, help us to trust you enough to be a blessing to those around us. Help us to trust you enough that we can be generous with what we have and give that away. We can't take it with us. Help us to be generous, Lord, with people, sometimes people we don't know, people that maybe not be like us, but help us to be generous. Not just with our money, not just with the dollars that say in God we trust every time we hand it out, but with our time, with our energy, sometimes just with our understanding and our words, to listen to people. And we're going, oh man, I really can't listen to this much longer. Yes, you can, if the Lord gives you strength to do that. Pray, Lord, I got a million things to do, and I'm not feeling good about this. I don't like to hear this, but help me, Lord, to be a blessing. And if you leave as a blessing. Leave the conversation, leave the presence as a blessing. So ushers want to come forward. And again, I'm going to ask you just to think about how you can be a blessing. Lord, how can I trust you? How can I do things your way and follow what you want for me?